We'll call this meeting to order at 7:09. During the declared state of emergency, the meeting will be conducted in accordance with California Government Code 54953E as authorized by resolution of the City Council. Please contact city.clerk@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the applicable resolution. All members of this Public Safety Advisory Board will participate in the meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing only to observe the live meeting and not make comments may do so on YouTube at youtube.com/mountainviewgov. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments online during the public comment period for an item by joining this webinar using the link https://mountainview.gov/meeting and entering the webinar code 838-757-3508, or by phone by dialing 669-900-9128 and entering the same webinar code 838-757-3508. Any emails received by 4:30 p.m. today were forwarded to the PSAB. Emails received after 4:30 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Ms. Ramberg, would you like to take roll?
Yes, Chair Frank. Chair Frank.
Present.
Vice Chair Wang.
Present.
Member Ayar. Member Brodowski.
Here.
Member Langton.
Present.
Member Tang.
Present.
Member Santu, not yet present.
And you have Member Ayar present, right?
I do.
Item 3 is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the advisory board on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the PSAB from acting on non-agendized items. Any member of the public like to provide comment on an item that is not on the agenda? If so, please click the raised hand button in Zoom or press 9 on your phone. And seeing none, we'll move forward. We will now close the oral communications item and move to discussion items. Minutes approval. So the minutes from May 26, 2022 meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions about the meeting minutes? Very good. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
May I have a second?
Second.
Vote. Member Brodowski.
Approved. Yes.
Member Wang, or Vice Chair Wang.
Yes.
Chair Frank.
Yes.
Member Langton.
Yes.
Member Tang.
Yes.
Member Ayar.
Yes.
Motion carries 6 votes.
Moving on to item 5.1, fiscal year 2022-23 Public Safety Advisory Board Work Plan Prioritization. This item will be presented by Ms. Audrey Seymour Ramberg, Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Chair Frank. This is the second meeting of a 2-meeting process for the PSAB to establish its proposed fiscal year 2022-23 work plan. At your last meeting, you had the first meeting of that two-step process. And at that meeting, I presented the status of current work plan items And PSEB members then were able to put forward up to 2 potential new work plan items. Since that time, staff has assessed the work plan items that were submitted and looking at a number of factors, and those factors include the fit with the advisory board's mission, and if any expertise were needed, the expertise would be on hand. Fit with the council's strategic priorities or existing city policy or referrals that may have come from council, avoidance of duplication of effort, the level of effort and time required by both PSEB members, our meeting time, and the time of members and staff between meetings. And that relates to the scope of the item. And then the timeliness of the issue, the need, or the relevance. So looking at all of those things, staff categorized the items. There were 9 items that were put forward by PSEB members, and then another 8 items that were either time limited but not yet completed and therefore would carry forward from the current work plan into the fiscal year 22-23 work plan, or could be considered ongoing in that they relate to things that happen each year. For that list, staff categorized them with regard to the status, whether it was something that was already existing or was new, the time frame, whether it was time limited or ongoing, the type of action which the PSAB would be focused on, and then a staff recommendation, either to just include because it's ongoing or continued, and those are items 1 through 11 in table 2 or 2A of the staff report, or those that were not recommended. Those that were recommended for prioritization. And those are the things that would be more substantive of the things that aren't ongoing, that would require likely the formation of a subcommittee and or just a medium or higher level of work effort. And of those, which are in table 2B, which are items 12 through 17, 3 of those staff has assessed and categorized as recommended for your consideration to prioritize, and the other 3 are not recommended by staff. But those are the 6 items that I would suggest that you can focus on in terms of how you want to prioritize picking one of them. That one would be added to the other 11 items that are identified by staff and recommended as included, and would be a 12-item work plan for fiscal year 22-23. And that is guidance that we have from the council that has gone out to all advisory boards in light of kind of the capacity of the organization and the workload of the organization needing to be right-sized. And that comes in, all the different ways that work comes into the organization, including the advisory board. So we've been given that direction to keep the work plans manageable. And so what I am suggesting is the work ahead of you tonight is to focus on those 6 items for prioritization. And I have a process once you've completed your discussion of the items, any clarification or modification that you want to make to the items. I have a process I can suggest for you to each have your own votes, which we can tally, and then that will help us identify the item that has the highest level of support. And that would be put forward as part of the proposed work plan. And all of the advisory board's proposed work plans go to the city council in September of each year. And so it will be council's action to consider that and approve it. So with that, I concluded my remarks, and I would suggest that you may wish to ask questions and kind of clarifying questions, and then you may wish to take public comment. before you then begin the work of deciding if you want to modify or take off any items and then have your prioritization. So Chair, you are muted.
Sorry, I was thinking aloud. Okay. So I guess we can open it up to comments from the members. That's Joan.
Did you say me?
Yes, ma'am.
I have questions. The first is item 7, the item about the military weapons annual report. I'm wondering this year, it may be that I just didn't look and I'm a little more aware now, but I don't know if we got the report on the military weapons before the meeting, and whatever, I'm hoping that next year we can have the report on military weapons with some anticipation. And related to that, could we have the report, any report that comes from staff on a Friday instead of a Monday before the PSAB meeting, so we have the weekend to look at it? That's one. The next one is item 12. And it's that bias and extreme, to look at whether bias and extreme views in policing, to what extent it exists. And that's already marked for consideration. I think that's important that we keep an eye on that. Number 15, an SRO MOU. I'm not sure what the MOU is about, but my question is, why isn't it recommended? And then number 14, to consider for prioritization domestic violence in the undocumented community. I'd like to know, is there some reason we're looking at just the undocumented community? Do we know enough about the rest of us who are citizens and can show a passport or a birth certificate, that we don't have to consider the rest of the community? I think there must have been something behind that, but I'd like to know what it is. So those are my 4 questions.
I can respond to questions now. Does that work for you, Chair Frank?
Yep.
For the military equipment, that's going to be an annual. There hasn't been an annual report yet, because this requirement is only just now gone into effect with the passage of Assembly Bill 481 or 1481. We did have a staff report that went into the packet that explained what that legislation was and what the new requirements would be, and that we needed to establish a policy, and that would go to council, and that did go to council. And when it went to council, council talked about the ongoing requirement that the legislation has imposed, that there be an annual reporting on the use of these pieces of equipment that you learned about at that meeting, and any proposed change to the equipment that the police department would purchase, and that the council wanted that to come to the PSAB. And so that's going to be on an annual schedule, and we would be bringing it to the PSAB annually as a written report, and we would provide it in the packet in advance of the meeting. And I'm also hearing you say that in general, having the packet sooner, Friday instead of Monday, would be of interest to you. So that's duly noted, and would be something we'd like to try to do, and can kind of think more about meeting scheduling and ways to allow us the time to do that.
Thank you.
Regarding extreme views, that I don't know if there was a quick question there. I think you were, commenting on your support of that idea. Regarding the SRO MOU, That's the memorandum of understanding between the city and each of the two school districts regarding how the school resource officer program will operate in those schools at a kind of a high policy level. The procedural manual is much more how, the training and practices and outcomes and other kinds of things are in. And when the PSAB did its evaluation of the program and made recommendations, and those were presented to the council in January of this year, the council made direction that authorized the staff to go forward and work with the school district on the MOU. They talked about whether or not they would want the MOU to come back to the PSAB, and they did not direct that the MOU come back to the PSAB. They did, however, direct that the procedure manual come to the PSAB, and so that is a continuing item. But the MOU, SRO MOU, is not recommended by staff, as that was not council's direction. And then on the domestic violence for undocumented, I would like to see if the PSAB member who proposed that idea would like to speak to their reasoning in putting that idea forward.
Yes, that would be me. Sorry about my late entry, folks. Had technical difficulties. Yes, Joan, the reason I did that is years ago when I was with the HRC, one of the biggest problems we found was that the undocumented domestic violence victims were very, very reluctant to go to the police, thinking that they would be then handed over to deportation proceedings. So I invited the FBI to come by, and they gave we spread the word around, but very, very few people came. We wanted to try to hold it off City Hall premises because they associate City Hall also with the police department. So the FBI came and explained to those who were there and to the HRC that that there's no rule against, it doesn't matter whether you're documented or not documented, citizen or otherwise, you are protected under the law from any criminality, any domestic violence. That was the main thing. And at the same time, I did put a note that I would like to include the people who are locals, people who are documented, and citizens and residents of City of Mountain View to fall under the same category. That was my reasoning. Does that help out?
That answers my question. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome, ma'am.
Okay, Eva?
Thank you. I wanted to pare it back and clarify what we are supposed to do for this, just so I understand what we're supposed to do. Are we given 2 votes on items in table 2B, items 12 through 17? So we're voting on 2 of those items, is that correct?
Yes, that is a good synopsis of the process. I have a table that I'll put up when you're at that point in the meeting, and it's got all of your names and it's got those items listed, and you each will tell me which 2 or tell each other which 2, and I'll document that, and then we'll see where those votes fall.
Okay, thank you.
And Joan?
No, I already had my say.
Sorry, Member Brodowski, you should. Okay, Member Ayar.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions about the items that I would like some clarification on, if possible. For item 7, the AB 481, I'm wondering, so the annual report, I'm assuming will include the military weapons that have been purchased that year. Is there any intent to advise us if certain larger purchases are being planned? Do we have any input on that, is my question? Or are we just reviewing what's happened after the fact? So I'd love a clarification on that. Then I have a question on item 9, drug trends. SROs present to students about dangerous trends. I'm not clear on what the role of PSAB would be in there. My understanding is that's happening. Is the idea we might review what the plan is for the upcoming school year, and it kind of give feedback on content, or I'm not sure exactly what our role is there. And also I have a question of, is this just for the high school district, is this just Mountain View High, or is there a discussion that SROs might go to the Los Altos campus, even though they're not supposed to be there, but in the role just to present? So that's my kind of two-part question there. I have a few more questions. Should I just go through them all, or does it make sense to stop, pause, and talk about those two and then keep going? Or should I just run through them all?
I'm able to take the notes, so it's your preference. What would you like?
I can keep going. I just didn't want to cause any troubles. Okay. Numbers 10 and 11, just clarification again of what the intent of the item is. MVPD recruitment and retention challenges and strategies. Is that a presentation that we get of what's happening and we discuss it? It says information. So does that translate to no, I guess that's probably a question with 9 too, is are we just taking it in so there's no action for us? There's no, it's just, same with 11. Are we giving any feedback? Do we have any active role and when we get that information? So 9 through 11, I guess, are similar set of questions. 13 and 14 are big items from my perspective. And I was curious if there's any precedent from having community members on any of these subcommittees who might have specialization in, teen substance abuse or are in the field of domestic violence. They feel very big, and I don't know of everyone's experience. And I guess I'm trying to say that it feels a little overwhelming, and I'm wondering, are there any precedents for partnering with people who are subject matter experts in these respective fields to help us do our best work? 16, I get that's not recommended. I understand that. I was curious if the PD has access to a presentation or information that could be shared with us about technological advances in things that were traditionally done by people, police officers, that are now automated, right? So, I don't know, speed, if there's speed cameras or red light cameras, is there a possibility, without causing too much work on any one person's shoulders, to kind of get a summary of or be pointed to resources on the latest technological advances in automated action for traditional police officer roles? So that's my question there. And the MOU, I think I've already made my thoughts known on this when it was originally suggested that the council did not pass this back to PSAB. I think that in my head, I differentiate the council specifically saying we don't want PSAB to look at that versus the council being inundated with information and not actually saying, oh yeah, we want PSAB to look at that. So in my mind, not saying yes doesn't mean they said no. And I think it's important. There's a lot of community interest in seeing that MOU before. And I want to make sure we're thoughtful about that before we decide that that's not on our remit. And based on the community support, I've already kind of probed with a couple of council members, like, and they were like, we don't remember that, right? So you know what I mean? It was a lot in that council meeting. So I would like to be thoughtful before we decide that's completely off the table. Thank you.
All right, Chair Frank, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna go through the answers to those questions.
If I could just intervene on the one thing, the drug number 9, the drug trends. So just for clarification, that came from me. It was born out of Member Wang's comments about a presentation she received at school that was less than desirable or great.
Yep.
The suggestion was that maybe the SROs could participate in improving that, but she has since said that they have come up with something better, and I don't think that this is probably any longer necessary. And Ms. Ramberg, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I think that when we get to that point, after you've gone through your questions and you've heard public comment and you're deciding what you'd like to do with the items, you know, Chair Frank, as you were the submitter of that idea, you could seek consensus from your colleagues to remove it if you would like. And so with that, let's see. I'm trying to, I'm looking at the military equipment annual reporting responsibilities and requirements. To see if I can answer your question about when and how. So the quantity possessed for each type of equipment, how it was used and the purpose of its use, the summary of any concerns, the results of any internal audits, the total annual cost, and acquisition plans. So yes, it does have a proactive piece around the plans for acquisition. So that responds to the question about item 7. Item 7. Regarding item 12, I'm sorry, that was Member Brodowski. Item 14, the SRO drug 10 presentation was what Chair Frank just spoke to. Oh, and that was actually item 9. I wrote down 14. And then in terms of 9, 10, and 11 that are identified as information items, your description of them, I thought was accurate, that they are intended to be for information purposes and for sharing, not just with the PSAB, but the community in general, things that are of interest, but aren't necessarily items that require recommendations or even necessarily comment, because they wouldn't necessarily be the kinds of things that the PSAB would be in a good position to comment on. For example, recruitment and retention. I can see that being something of interest to the PSAB and wanting to know, how does the police department do that? You know, because the way that item was framed was around what are the challenges and the practices, and so we could share that information with the PSAB in a way that's a relatively low impact lift for Mike and his colleagues to pull together and present to the PSAB. And similarly around the services and enforcement activities related to people who are unstably housed and using their vehicles for living purposes. That's a very large area of service delivery and policy in the city that could be summarized and presented to the PSAB. Mm-hmm. For items 13 and 14, those are big items that have areas of expertise that are covered within our police department and also that live outside of our police department. And I think that is a relevant consideration for the PSAB to have in deciding which of these things would be a focus. But it would not be traditional or advised to have non-PSAB members on a subcommittee, but certainly could be consulted with, similar to the way that we are doing with the mental health subcommittee, where the part of the role of the subcommittee, and you also have the support of me on staff, is to connect with people who have that expertise. But I think it's helpful that you've got that question out there, that there are limits to how much kind of expertise that we can bring to bear on different topics. And we want to pick the topics that are going to be, the best fit for the mission of the PSAB and the expertise that we have as staff and PSAB members, and the connections that we can bring to inform ourselves. As an example of that, we have a good connection with county behavioral health when we're looking at the mental health crisis models, and that doesn't require us to be mental health experts. With regard to the technology and the advances on item 16 in non-staffed ways to address different police services, just in my hearing of your question, that feels like a different project than the one that has been proposed by one of your colleagues. And so if it was wanting that as an information item, that could conceivably be an information item that we could see if we have the capacity to add that to the other items in the work plan. But I don't know that it would sub out for this. I mean, it's still your prerogative as a board to prioritize any of these 6. But if you wanted to have that other item, I think it's a different item than looking at alternative models to traffic traffic stops. Regarding SROs, my memory was that it did get raised and discussed as the possibility for the MOU to come back to the PSAB. I honestly don't remember if it was something that was as formal as a motion that then was voted, that was not approved. I'm guessing it wasn't, but I think there may have been individual council members who raised it, but in the ultimate motion that was made and was put forward, that was not included. And so again, with these other items, it is something that the PSAB could ask to, could prioritize as something you'd like to have brought to the council for consideration, and then they would act on that when they look at the all of the advisory body work plans in September. I believe those were your questions. Did I miss any?
Nope, you got them all. Thank you so much. And I have a follow-on, Cleve, when other folks have spoken.
Anyone else? Kavita, do you want to go now, or do you want to wait?
So just on my question, this is specifically Captain Mike. So is there an existing document, presentation, links, person in the police department who tracks automation of things that are traditionally done by officers? I don't know. This might be easily answered and something exists. So I was curious if there is anything like that.
So we have an innovations group, and I think that would probably be the closest thing to what you're describing. And although they wouldn't track what's manually done versus what can be automated, they certainly would be kind of towards the forefront of emerging technologies or kind of available technologies that in some cases might augment or support or replace human beings doing police work.
Okay. I didn't realize that group existed. That's cool. Thank you.
Very good. Remember, your hand is still up, so do you have other? Very good. Anyone else? Questions, comments, anyone else? Nothing from the peanut gallery. Okay. I guess at this point we can open it up to public comments. Is that correct, Ms. Rember? Very good. I will see. Let's see. Okay, very good. First, we have Tim McKenzie. I think we have time to do the full 3 minutes.
Hi all, looking forward to seeing the discussion. Just on hearing some of the answers to the questions, I'd like to make kind of a conceptual point. It seems like on the proposed work plan, there are several low effort items that will take up time, but they're just informational and prevents the body from performing its advisory role. Just hearing information is not actually giving an advisory role. I'd rather, instead of several low effort things that doesn't really have a chance for action from PSAB, take one or two kind of meatier things that are difficult, like that are higher effort, but perhaps more impactful. With regards to some of the specific items, absolutely, I support looking into bias and extreme views in policing. If we recently had the state report that there has been infiltration in some places in California. In 2006, the FBI released a report that white supremacists were looking to infiltrate law enforcement. I've met some police officers in Mountain View through MVPDX. I don't think we have that as an issue, but it would be really great to actively confirm that and perhaps provide a model for local cities looking to show we don't have white supremacists or insurrectionists in our department. With regards, I'm a few years too old to have had active shooter drills in school, but I am young enough that I know several people who died in the opioid epidemic. Like I know several people who have overdosed, and this has been a long-going issue. I think that's something that could be worthwhile to look into. And I just want to raise an idea of how it's actually connected to an existing item, the mental health response. Mental health, one of the major things that at least I see as that is looking for what's the appropriate response that is not necessarily law enforcement for something that is not a law enforcement issue. For a mental health issue, it's not a law enforcement issue. Substance abuse is a public health issue, not a law enforcement issue. And looking into how to give the correct response and make the right resources meet what we have, I think seems something that is worthwhile. Also, really depolicing traffic enforcement, I think that's something that is worthwhile looking into. We have a local model. Berkeley looked into that in the past year or two, I believe. It's something that we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel on, but it's worth at least considering and looking into, especially having heard from MVPDX how traffic enforcement may be one of the most dangerous things police do. So let's try to remove that dangerous element from the job, free up the cops to just do what they are there to do. And just one last point, I'm confused about all the time spent on SROs if we're not going to actually have an impact on the MOU and know like what the actual public agreement is between the city and school district. It seems a little weird. Thank you much.
Next is Bruce England.
I promoted the wrong person, so could we take Ms. Connor?
Sure, thank you. Yes, I was a little confused. Hi, this is Miriam Connor. I'm speaking on behalf of the Mountain View Coalition for Police Reform and Accountability. Just some thoughts that we had as a coalition on the work plan. So given that there is limited space, we wanted to share some ideas for where we think items could be condensed or eliminated or streamlined. So one thing we noticed that there's several police department presentations that potentially could be combined into a single work plan item for regular PD report backs. So there's the annual report, there's the military weapons annual report, and there's the quarterly complaint data report. And it's not totally clear to us why these need to be separate work plan items, and we wondered if the board would consider making them a single item. And then in general, we believe that any informational item added to the PSAB work plan should provide a clear value to the public and potentially to City Council, since this is an advisory board to council. So if the goal is to educate the public, it's possible for some of these items, MVPDX could be a more successful venue for members of the public who are interested to really get into the details. And we think that PSAB should ideally be prioritizing the more actionable items. So a couple of items where it's not clear what role the PSAB actually plays. We're instructing SROs to present to students on drug trends, and it sounds like you're already discussing removing that one. And then also the recruitment and retention challenges and strategies item. So we'd ask that you consider removing items if they aren't actionable, and that if you don't know already, if there's broad interest from the community to hear about them in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. England.
Thank you, Chair Frank. Just want to mention to Mike, I could not see your timer. So you might need to put that like way up to the camera. Do we have 3 minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so Bruce England, also speaking on behalf of MVCPRA. According to the staff memorandum, PSAB has tighter restrictions on its work plan than other advisory bodies do, as far as we can determine. And we note that what PSAB is told in the memorandum for this meeting is different from what other advisory bodies have been told so far. So we're wondering, where is the direction to limit coming from? I've personally heard from council members that they seek more from advisory bodies, not less. Accordingly, advisory body work plans should be as robust as possible. Also, current work plans vary widely as far as the number of fiscal year and ongoing items go. For example, PRC has 13 and EPC 11 in their work plans for the current fiscal year. And similarly, PRC has 18 ongoing work plan items, BPAC has 12, and HRC has 10. Secondly, the work plan memorandum talks about prioritizing, not defining what the work plan will actually look like as it goes to council. This feels incomplete to us. PSAB should have a chance to see that and approve it first. Among other details, we hope to see direction for appropriate work items to be actionable on the part of PSAB, as Miriam mentioned. And then lastly, to Kavita's question on the PSAB subcommittee member inclusion, yes, BPAC allows someone not on BPAC to be the appointed VTA BPAC representative on behalf of BPAC, and in practice, who can report back to BPAC about what happened at those meetings. Greg Unangst held that role for at least one term. Thank you.
Chair Frank, you're unmuted.
Sorry, my bad. Mr. Luther is next.
Hello, this is Dave Luker, also commenting with Bruce and Miriam on behalf of MVCPRA. Yeah, a couple of other items, I think, along the same lines of maybe streamlining or tucking some things under other things, as well as voicing some support for some of the items in the unprioritized list that we would like to see brought up. So the first item that we do support prioritizing is the item on bias and extreme views in policing. Our members do have experience with, some of the MVPT officers through MVPDX, and we haven't really, detected anything like those extremist views. But we do think it is, an important and pervasive issue that has implications in every community in California, and that it needs to be taken seriously. So we do hope that the PSAB there can consider investigating extremism in our community and enacting recommendations from the auditor locally. Yeah, and then second, some items that we do think can be tucked under others. So especially under the existing kind of mental health response item. Substance abuse in particular seems like it could be routed to that mental health subcommittee. And then, we don't know if we actually have like enough info on domestic violence as an issue. It could be another area where mental health professionals could be the more effective, at least as first responders than police. So it could also fall on the purview of that subcommittee. We know domestic violence and substance abuse are way more than mental health issues, but do feel like a subcommittee that is exploring a nonviolent first response would be well suited to take on those issues. And then we also, on that note, would also like to add that, ask that you add a milestone to the work plan for a report from the county and city on what is actually happening with the mental health related programs. And then third, with the SRO items, we do think that PSAB should review the SRO and the SRO manual and the MOU jointly. So put those items together. Even if there does need to be like approval or reconsideration from city council, we think it's worth it. We do think it's the only way to get a full picture of the work of SROs is to combine those items. So some thoughts there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Brown.
Hey, Cleve. I'll keep it quick. I'd just like to echo the sentiments of the previous speakers. I think that as much as I love Mike's presentations, they're great. The A in PSAD doesn't stand for audience, and I think that the work plan should involve work, just actual actionable things that are making a difference in the community, not just informational presentations. Thanks.
Very good. With that, do we have any additional, I think that's it for members of the public. Yes, it is. Do we have any members of the board who would like to make additional comments or have additional questions? Yes, member IR.
I just wanted to muse a little bit. We were told that when we kind of explored whether public safety goes beyond the police department, that no, we were strictly focused on the police department. When I look at 13 and 14, I feel like those go beyond the police department. Are we kind of reconsidering what the term public safety means? Or 13 and 14 meant to be looked at strictly as it relates to how police might interact with those problems? Because the way they're worded, they sound more broad. And so I'm just musing because this has been an ongoing discussion. What does public safety mean and entail? So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Does anyone have the original charge from council about what we should do? I'm sure it's at the beginning of my binder, but I don't know where I'd find it.
Perhaps I can just.
Yeah, go ahead, Cal.
Okay, perhaps I can just put my 2 cents in there. Every time the first agency, which is always called in domestic violence, is the police. So under that, I say it's public safety, which is true, and it comes under what we are told to do. And I agree with Joan. What was our original premise? What's our original duties as PSAP? Thank you.
Assistant City Manager Lambert, do you have a comment?
Yes, the scope of the PSAB is directly related to advising the police department on and taking in community input and advising the city council on police matters. It wasn't defined broadly as public safety or public health. In terms of items 13 and 14 and the question that member IR has brought up, I think that's a good dialogue for you to have amongst yourselves in terms of the people who put forward those items. And I think with domestic violence, what I heard from the proponent was that it was around making the police department's services more accessible to people who may not feel, because of their documentation status, that they could report. So that felt, as Member Sandhu stated, as related. In terms of substance abuse, I think the commissioner who brought that up can speak to how they saw that as related to the police department's role, but certainly in things that uh, the aspect of the use of the, as an illegal substance, and education and awareness around that. Police has a role. They're not the only professional. They're not treatment professionals. And so if it were to be advising on treatment, as opposed to understanding dangers and raising awareness, I think we would be getting further out from the scope of the PSAB and the MVPD. So I think with any of these, you can ask those good questions, hear from your colleagues in terms of what their intent was, and you can clarify and modify these descriptions to make them more appropriate if you feel that that's what's needed.
Ms. Tang?
That's Member Tang.
Member Tang,
Chair
yes.
Frank. I'm just kidding. I'm hearing a lot of conflicting information because I was around for the creation of the PSAB, and I remember I don't know if it has been codified as being strictly related to MVPD, but I remember I don't remember exactly who would have said it, but I remember it having been said that it was named Public Safety Advisory Board because they did not want to limit it to strictly policing issues. So I am hearing conflicting information now about what the intent of our board is and what is under the purview of our board. And I guess I need clarification from, I guess, council itself. Like, what did you want us to do? That is my question.
So I am looking at the way that it was described in the report that went to the council and the way that it's described on the website regarding the general functions of the advisory board. And the general purpose statement is to advise and make recommendations to the council, city manager, and police chief on public safety matters. Doesn't say policing matters, it does say public safety matters, but it's described as being to the council, the manager, and the police chief. In terms of the functions, it's providing the council, manager, and police chief with community-informed input and recommendations on public safety matters, serving as a forum for public discussion of public safety matters, including community policing concepts, furthering MVPD engagement and transparency efforts, and identifying best practices, and acting as a liaison between the community and the police department.
Good. Anyone have any? Yes, Member Ayar. You're unmuted.
Darn it. Just when I have one meeting where I don't do that. I don't know. It's open a little, isn't it? It's a little fuzzy there, that description. So it's interesting. I wanted to hear from the proponent, whoever proposed 13, a little bit more detail of what the intent was there. And how it relates back to public safety. What was your thinking? I'm not sure whose that was.
I think I suggested 13.
You
That's
did.
on substance abuse. I think when I suggested it, I was thinking of it more in, I guess, like the general term public safety, rather than in relation to the police department. But I do feel like with the composition of our board and having Captain Canfield from the police department, that's actually beneficial if we want to examine this issue, because I think the police department probably knows a lot more about substance use in our community than, I guess, a different board, or they have valuable input. So on this issue, I think we could explore it on this board because of that reason. So taking into account police knowledge and all of that to make a recommendation or to examine it beyond the police aspect.
Okay, so you were thinking beyond.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think also, along with the one that I had suggested, the intent, in my perspective, was also with the inclusion of fentanyl and so many things that people are using. A lot of young students aren't aware of its prevalence in drugs. And so my thought was that maybe the SRO team could assist the school system in describing and explaining and making sure the students had this awareness. And so again, using the SROs to sort of make improve relationships and make contact with students on their own territory to sort of help make that problem better. But I mean, again, I think that they probably already do this work, and so I don't think that at least not mine, is necessary. What else?
I still, yeah.
Okay, very good. Then,
Please.
yes.
Sorry, Chair, I have my hand raised. I keep raising my hand because I don't know. I don't think I'm supposed to just jump in. So it's like okay, at least I don't think so. Okay, so I'm gonna say something, and then someone's gonna say something back, and then I'm gonna raise my hand again to say something. That's the correct thing, right? So trying to be polite here. Okay, so just going back to the public comment, there were a couple of items that I had questions on because I didn't immediately know the answer. Ms. Ramberg, if you could comment more about the thinking on limiting the number of items. Is it just sanity? Like you can't do everything. So can you talk more about it? Because I'm not familiar with the EPC or HRC lists. Like, I don't know how meaty those their 10, 13 items are. And I was curious, in your experience, what's the benefit of us being more, more limited with our scope or our work plan scope?
There's a lot of variability across the commissions depending on what their mission is, and for the EPC, they are a quasi-judicial body that has a very specific role in reviewing development and long-range planning, and being, part of the process of community input for certain kinds of things that come through to the council. And then on the other, another model or example would be the Human Relations Commission, which, and I would say the EPC doesn't do anything between meetings. They don't have subcommittees. They have staff who are already have to be reviewing these development proposals and analyzing them, and applying their professional expertise, and then the EPC is a stop along the way for that work. So the EPC's work plan is more driven by things that are already on staff's plate. Whereas things like, and PRC is often similar to that as well, where there are park designs and master plans around open space or trees or biodiversity that are things that are on the staff's work plan, either because they are generated by work that the staff has identified as necessary in understanding and meeting community needs, or something that the council has adopted as part of its strategic roadmap and its work plan, and then that gets assigned to the staff, and then the staff engages the commission in those items. And so there's just a variety of different ways that items come to be on the work plan. And as I mentioned, HRC, I think, is a little bit more like PSAB than say the PSAB is like the EPC or the PRC, in terms of saying, we have an interest in learning more about something and bringing something to awareness. And it's going to take some level of research and analysis and work that is not already on staff's work plan, and therefore needs to be prioritized so that, because no commission has a full-time staff person. In the instance of Mike and myself, this is an important part of our jobs, but it's one of many things that we are responsible for. And also it's with the subcommittees, it's time from the subcommittee members too, from the commission members. And in my experience providing staff support to the HRC, I've just kind of seen what a group of very dedicated and talented volunteers may wish to do, and then what winds up being practically accomplished within the course of a one-year work plan. And for the HRC, for example, it's not unusual that they have items that don't get completed and carry forward. And so it's one of those things that if you have 10 priorities, but you really are only able to do a certain number of them, then maybe you don't really have them as priorities. And in terms of the direction from council, they have, under a couple of their recent meetings, actually pulled this item off of consent, pulled items off of work plans because they are concerned about the workload and the capacity of staff. And, if you have been able to see, we're able to see the June 14th presentation that the city manager gave about budget, you would have heard about how we kind of are at a critical point with regard to vacancies and
82, right?
Yeah.
I recall. Yeah.
So that it's not meant to be something that's singling out PSAB. PSAB's a little different just because of the nature of it generating these new ideas and looking into things. But it is something that across the board, the city manager and the city council are very sensitive to.
Thank you. Can I keep going? Captain Mike, I had a question for you. On the presentations, like MVPD recruitment and retention challenges, what support services are happening with residents living in vehicles, are there other opportunities planned where those are getting presented out to the broader community, or could there be?
I could see perhaps, depending on a neighborhood association meeting, or a CNC meeting, if those are relevant to the neighborhood or the community as a whole, those issues being teed up and addressed. But the really simple, short answer is no. There's nothing specifically planned.
Okay, thank you.
If I may add on to that response, with regard to services available for people who are using vehicles as their residents, that is an item that comes to council quite frequently. with a variety of different contracts and programs and updates. There was just an update to the City Council on the June 14th agenda that we could send the link around to PSAB for your information. And then there's an annual report that that staff prepares that looks at the point in time count that the county does for folks that are homeless, and the range of different counts of people living in vehicles, and then a synopsis of our status of our safe parking programs. That will be coming to council probably in the fall. And so that would be a way to get that information without it coming to the PSAB.
Yes.
So I'm reluctant to pull these off just yet, because who knows, things change, right? And I think this is information that is helpful as context. But I would be interested on keeping an eye on these, and if there's something is coming to City Council that's like any of these, right, similar topics, that we have that option to go to City Council and participate there, or have the information, look at the information afterwards versus having it in PSAB, because we do have, what feels like probably is going to be a heavier work plan than we had last year. Of course, we have a longer period of time this time. So I just wanted to say that, but I'm reluctant to, despite the public comment, I'm reluctant to pull those off because I think context is important.
Very good. Anything else? I see the wheels turning.
Does it show over Zoom? I'm like, yeah, I guess. Sorry. Well, okay, I'm just going to share something, right? I have been given feedback that I talk too much and other people on this meeting don't talk enough. So I really want to give space and opportunity, but I don't understand why no one else is raising their hand. Am I the only, how am I, one of me and Joan having questions? And that's it. Oh, and Eva, thank you. Thank you for raising your hand.
Well, Eva and Jeanette, I mean, it's not so terrible. And sometimes we've got other people who come.
I know, but it's, I feel like I'm dominating and I've been told that, so I want to make space. Thank you, Cal.
Yeah, enough guilt feelings.
Now, if we just get Derek to raise his hand, we will.
Yeah. Get Derek to come in, and that'll be fine.
I would just offer, Member Ayer, that you are on this committee because of your voice and your ability to describe and explain and ask these questions. And I would invite for you to, espouse as much as you like. Member Tang.
Oh, I was just gonna offer that Member Ayar's questions are so thorough that that she covers all the points that I think some people may have had, some questions that people may have had, but maybe you got to it first. I don't know. I just wanted to offer that.
Sure. Member Sandy.
I concur with Member Tang and the chair, and now to add on top of it, not brown nosing or anything, that Kavita, you are very eloquent in how you say it, and it brings credence to all the topics. And with that said, I want to just add another thing, a question for the staff, Mr. Ramberg, the fact that, for example, the profiling, is that a item which has been handled by the HRC? We used to do that, and it could be like a nightmare sometimes when you literally had 2 sessions at the community center, and you have the speakers, public speaking, 3 minutes times 90 people lined up, and they're all off topic, but that's the beauty of free speech. So if they are doing it, and it's the police department and which it should be under the PSAP, shouldn't we be doing it? I hope I made some sense with that question.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandhu. You're talking about members of the community speaking to an experience with profiling, with racial profiling by the police department?
Yes, we had once, we did that where we had the public come out. I think that was when we were talking about racial profiling, and also it was when we were working on authorizing the tasers. We were one of the first cities, and what we wanted the police department to do. But what I'm talking mainly right now, maybe I mixed two of them, but mainly during the profiling, is the HRC doing that now still?
That is not something that is on their work plan to do.
Oh, really? That was huge in the HRC then, but I'm a dinosaur from there anyway. So if that's not, I think then it's crucial that we have it, because it's a very, very important item. And that can shed a lot of light on what the PD really does. And that will show the public exactly, the community exactly where what the standing is with the statistics. Thank you.
Member Ayat?
Me again. So I had a question on, or clarification on, again, another comment that was made by the public. So what is what is the event? What am I trying to say? How do the events unfold? So we talk here and do a work plan. We approve that. Then that goes to council for approval. And they may pull stuff off if they feel that it is too much of a burden on staff, or maybe it's not appropriate. Could we talk more and understand what happens after the discussion here?
And you summarized it well. All of the advisory boards develop a proposed work plan, and those are compiled together and brought to the city council in September. And the city council can approve it as is or can make changes to it. Sometimes they add things because they want to make a referral, something that they would like to see a commission do. Sometimes they say, we're not interested in that, we'd like to take that off. Or sometimes they've said, that seems like too much. Mm-hmm. I lost whatever my other point was going to be, but you accurately summarized it.
So we're doing it now, but council only looks at it in, they may review it before in the packet, but they only sort of vote on it or approve it in September.
That's correct. That becomes your annual work plan. And I did remember my point. There's an actual council policy around the fact that the council has to approve advisory body work plans. You know, the advisory boards are in service to the council, and they don't set policy, they advise the council, and the council therefore needs to be aware of the things that each advisory board is working on, and feel like the city is in a place where it can support the work of each of those advisory boards, and then approve that.
Right. Thank you for the clarification.
Very well. Are there any other questions? Okay. And Ms. Raymond, we don't have any action on this at this meeting. Is that correct?
You do. You do. What you need to do is, I guess if there've been some discussion about whether any of the items in table 2A, which staff has put forward as suggested to be included, because, for example, the mental health crisis response and the police traffic data, that's an existing item that won't be completed. Those are existing items that won't be completed. And then some other ongoing ones, and then also some informational ones, which it was Mike's and my call to say, because they weren't heavy lifts, and there seemed to be a PSAB interest, that we would be happy to prepare the information item and bring them. It was raised as to whether some of those things are as important to the PSAB as other things you might wish to do. So you could speak to that. And Chair Frank, you've already said that you're happy to remove item 9. So I've just kind of done that in my, if you might want to seek, general consensus from your colleagues on that. And then if there are other people who want to make other comments about items 1 through 11 as to whether any of those might, come off or be treated differently. Otherwise, if you don't need to or want to do that, then you have a voting process that, I can pull up a tally sheet for you to pick from items 12 to 17, which ones are the highest priority to include on your work plan.
Okay, so I go through items 1 through 11 to make sure that everybody's in sync with those. Is that what you were saying? Okay. All right. So here we go. Did you want to do you want to poll each person on each item?
I guess what I'd like to say, maybe is as each person can go in turn and determine if there's any of these that they would like to remove or treat differently than the way that they are listed in item in table 12A.
Very good. Okay, so then we'll start. We'll just go one by one.
Yeah.
Okay. So Member Brodowski, are there any items between number 1 and number 11 that you think we should treat differently?
I think that number 9 is probably not too important for us. It's important, but not for us.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
We're talking about section A, right?
Yes, numbers 1 through 9. 11.
1 through 11. 1 through 12. No, 11, excuse me.
11.
Yes. So that's the only comment I have.
Okay, very good. Member IR. You're muted.
Darn it, twice in a meeting. Chair Frank, I just wanted to confirm, are you suggesting that 9 be removed?
I am.
Okay, then I support that. And then I guess I have just a small clarification. 4, 5, 6, can those be consolidated? Does it make a difference if they're consolidated? Do they happen at different times? Is there a one item where we hear all of this information? I'm not sure what the timing on each of those is.
Question. I think that the two considerations would be timing and also would be, are they different enough in the work that you do to prepare them that the only thing that they save is that you've got one agenda, and as opposed to they're coming on multiple agendas. So I don't know that it makes a substantive difference in terms of the space that they take up in time, both to discuss and to prepare for.
Cool, thank you.
And they are at the same, they come at the same time?
I'd have to look at that. I'm not entirely sure when we're going to do the SRO annual report. The MVPD annual report is typically spring, and I also have to look at what the requirements are for the AB 481. If it's annual based on when it's adopted, and it was adopted by the council in April, I believe, then that could work out that those would be on the same agenda. But I don't again think that it makes a difference in terms of what the preparation is. They're very different things that need to be done to prepare for them.
Okay, thank you.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Member Sandhu.
I agree with both Kavita and Joan members that 9, since 9 is going to be out, 1 through 11 minus 9 is good with me. And if there's any possibility of like 4, 5, 6 maybe 4 and 5 been combined at the same time to save time and effort, that would be good. But otherwise, I'm fine with the way things are. Thank you.
Member Wang. I should say Vice Chair Wang.
I think I agree that item 9 might not be so important to be on our work plan, but I do want to make sure that we have it in the SRO like procedure manual as a priority and something that happens repeatedly. For the item 10 and 11, I think just for me, I don't feel like it needs to, what's happening? I don't feel like it needs to be included just for me because I feel like there's nothing, well, there are things, but I just don't know how workable or impactful it could be. And if we wanted context, I guess, in another sense, or if we had a work plan item in a future year that related to actions we could take on these topics, then perhaps we could have these presentations then when we have steps that we want to take after it as well. So those are my thoughts, including 9 on the SRO manual and then 10 and 11. I personally find that I think we could leave that out.
Number 10.
I too would like to remove item 9, mostly because it is presenting to students and does not necessarily involve us. I do think that giving information to students is important, though. So I hope that Captain Canfield makes note of that priority. I would also like to remove item 10 because it is informational. I think contrary to Vice Chair Wang's comments on possibly 11, I would like to keep 11 because it would give residents an opportunity to comment on the enforcement of laws related to vehicle residents. And I think that has been an important issue in the community. Thank you.
Member Langton. You're still on mute.
Yeah, I hit the wrong button. Yeah, I support 1 through 11 with the removal of 9.
Very good. And just a little context on 9. The action item on that was to advise the SROs to create a program or a presentation for students that they could use as part of the outreach. So that was the action item. Again, I feel like they already do that, so I don't think it's necessary there for us to have that in. That's why I'm asking for it to be removed. I also agree that number 10 is a bit of a presentation, and I don't know that we have the ability to affect recruitment and or stop officers from retiring. And so I feel like that might be an item that we probably could leave to the powers that be in the department. Also, the quarterly complaint data, and I think this is probably long-term. I feel like this is something that if we are working on the data component and that there's going to be a website, I feel like that's something that could be rolled into that effort, and that information could be placed there and maybe not need to be in our meeting. But I know that there may be some specific requests from the council for us to review that data, but I feel like the transparency of that could go into whatever website or presentation model we decide to use for the data. So that would be my comment there. Okay, and then moving on to items 12 through 17. So we'll start all over. Member Brodowski, you are up.
If I might, I'm sorry for interrupting, Chair Frank. I have a spreadsheet, and it makes it easy for me to keep track of kind of who's who's saying, not so much who's saying what, but where we end up at the end of everybody saying their piece. So is it okay with you if I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, are you seeing a Excel spreadsheet with items 12 through 17?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try to make that bigger, maybe not that big. Okay, so I don't know if you all need some time to consider what your two choices will be for this list, but you know, Chair Frank, if when you are ready or your colleagues are ready, you want to take people's votes, I will go ahead and include them here.
Very good. Member Bernowski?
Yes, would like to see number 12 included and number 14.
Very well. Member Langton?
Hold it. Okay. Yeah, I would approve of number 12. And if number 14 is more broadly defined as just domestic violence in general, I would go with that.
Ms.
I think
Rambert,
that's
you're in
what-
the wrong column.
Up, thank you.
Member Sandhu?
A quick question, are we allowed to do just 2 or more?
Ms.
Just
Rambert?
two, just two.
2, okay. Then it's 12 and 14 for me, please. Thank you.
Member Tang?
I would, let's give Ms. Remberg a moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I would like to vote for item 12, and I would like to see number 15 rolled into item 1. But I don't know if that is that a separate vote? Yeah, I'll just count that.
Member Wang?
I'm also interested in, actually, I'm interested in item 13 and 15 in the same way that Member Tang was talking about, but yeah.
Very good. That leaves Member Dar.
So I have a question for my co-subcommittee, mental health subcommittee members. Do you feel 13 is within the remit of what we're looking at in our subcommittee? Could it be rolled in there?
I don't see why not.
I guess for me, I see how it's connected. But I feel like if we were to roll it in, I don't know if we would be able to do either very, very thoroughly. So I would prefer to have them as separate items. For me, I think item 12, the reason I'm a little bit hesitant about it is because we do have a subcommittee currently on traffic stop bias, which is still like a different issue from bias and extreme views in policing, but I feel like it still addresses bias in our police department. So I would personally like to see that and the results of the traffic stop subcommittee, traffic stop bias subcommittees work first, and potentially add in item 12 as a work plan item for next year after the subcommittee has concluded its work.
Ms. Ramberg, may I ask, is it possible to update and change the work of the subcommittee after it's already started?
I think there would need to be a priority that this is something that you want to do. And I think there is an expectation that the current work will end at some point. I just don't know when in the next fiscal year it will end. And so I think that the idea of combining scope into existing vehicles doesn't really reduce the, doesn't really reduce the scope, doesn't really reduce the workload impact. So I think if this is if this is a topic that's a priority for the commission, then you would want it to be, voted on and placed in your work plan. And unless you were saying you wanted to discontinue the other committee, which I wasn't hearing.
I don't think so.
Member IR, your thoughts.
Okay, so I'd like to see 12. I feel that 13 is inextricably linked to what we're looking at with mental health. It's just there, and my intention, Vice Chair Wang, is to do substance abuse, looking at that, especially in youth, do that justice in our subcommittee work. It's hard because 15 is like 14 is this big thing and 15 is this relatively little thing, and so it's hard. Why are the votes equal there, or how can the votes be equal? I think the SRO MOU should be combined with one, and I think we should look at domestic violence. So, Member Tang, I'm going to go ahead and pick 3. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm like, they're not apples to apples here. So 15 is a different beast. So it's hard for me to separate those out.
So what I'm hearing is that everybody who's commented in support of the SRO MOU feels that it is not only something you think is appropriate to do, but a smaller lift. And you're lobbying to have not be limited to, if this was one of your votes, you're lobbying to not be limited to 2 votes. Is that what I'm hearing?
That represents my view for sure.
Ms. Renberg, we are able to ask the council for direction on this, is that correct?
It's not an interactive process typically. These typically go on the consent calendar. So it's, what you recommend to them is your proposed work plan, and they either approve it as is, or they take the item and request changes to it. So
but my question
they would
is,
certainly want to give direction around the SRO MOU if that was different from what they at least some of them may have chosen not to do. And I do remember there being an explicit discussion around this because of the typical way in which such operational MOUs are the discretion of the city manager and staff. So yeah, I think they would want to be explicit in their saying, yeah, that in this instance, we want to reconsider what direction we gave and now give this direction or approve this proposal from the PSAB.
but my question is are we allowed to send a question to the council for them to respond to us? Is that not a thing?
It's not a thing. I apologize, since they only act on, as a body, and they act as a body during agendized meetings, and the agendized meeting where this topic will be coming forward to them is September. So I think what I think is important to hear is, does a majority of the PSAB, want to have, maybe we take the SRO item out. Maybe that's the way we keep it to the process, having some degree of consistency across, for people who didn't choose it, to have 2 votes, and people who want to choose it to have 3 votes doesn't seem quite consistent. Maybe we take item 15 separately and allow each of you to determine, whether you would like to have that be in your work plan, and if it has a majority support, then you would still have your 2 votes, Eva and Jeanette and I'm sorry, Commissioner Tang, Vice Chair Wang, and Commissioner Ayar.
May I ask, so it is, so the MOU is a legal document, is that not correct? It's a legal agreement?
It is.
I just don't feel like there's an opportunity to advise on a legal agreement between the city, two government bodies, essentially, right? The school system and the city. That's all going to happen between, you know, the city's attorneys and the district's attorneys. And I don't really know how there's a way to affect that from this body.
Well, it wouldn't be standard, certainly, but I suppose if there were concepts that are the kinds of concepts that tend to, first is the question of what tends to be covered in an MOU. And, you know, not every aspect of the SRO program would be covered in the MOU. And the things that would be covered are things that, you know, for the roles and responsibilities of the party and the purposes of the SRO program. And by and large, having kept touch with Mike and his colleagues as they've been developing that and talking with the school district about it, it reflects what went to the city council by and large. And what went to the city council was informed in great part by the work done by the PSAB and the recommendations that came from the PSAB. And so were this to be something that council agreed that it would be valuable to have the PSAB play a role, and your comments were your input or your feedback related to things that would be the appropriate kind of thing to include an MOU, then the attorneys would have to put it into legal language, right? We wouldn't be expecting that you guys would be wordsmithing it in developing the legal language. So, you know, were it to be something that a majority of the PSAB wished to ask council to have be part of your work plan, and the council were to agree to that, then it would, you know, have been through attorney review. It may, there may be additional input that the PSAB would identify, and then it would have to go back to determine if that could be worked into legal documents, and that was also acceptable to the legal counsel for the school districts.
Okay, well, with that in mind, my votes are 12 and 14.
So, Chair Frank, are you amenable to having each member determine whether or not they feel an MOU, the PSAB review of the SRO MOU should be included in the proposed work plan?
Yes, Member Wayne.
I have something addressing the MOU and then also a separate comment from when I was raising my hand earlier. So that now seems real. But in terms of the MOU, I think for me and what I'm thinking about is that I want to make sure that after we, you know, the subcommittee put a lot of effort into discussing how we want the SROs, or like how we kind of see the SROs roles be playing out in the community, that we do continue to see like the impact of that work, and then also the continuation of that. So I think for me, the MOU is important just to see kind of if it's in line with what we were talking about before. But also that kind of brought my head to another point, which was item 6. I know we've already talked about that, but I would like to go back to it and suggest that maybe we phrase that in a way that's like specific actions that we do want to do in terms of an SR report, because I feel like we could just receive a report on, how the SRs are doing and what programs have been this year. But I'd like to have some things set up so that when we do have that report, we have things that we're looking at, and we're always looking at ways that we can improve our SRO program. So I'm wondering if, I haven't thought of specific words yet myself, but if we could rephrase item 9 or item 6, sorry, to kind of set ourselves up for success in the future and know what we actually want to talk about in terms of SROs. That is my first point. Should I let you guys talk and then come back to the second point, or?
Continue.
Okay. And then for the other thing I want to talk about is for item 12, because I noticed there's a lot of support around it. And I do think that it's super important that we, talk about and address it. But I feel like when I'm reading it, it says like examine the state auditor's report and related legislation. I guess for the state auditor's report, to me, that's kind of like reread it and learn about current and potential practices to prevent this in MVPD. I'm wondering if after we do that and we learn about these practices, like, are we going to suggest that, like, are we going to make a recommendation and have them, well, that's pretty obvious, like have them implement it, I guess. For me, I do see how the topic itself is very important. But I'd like to see kind of ways that it could be more impactful, because I think personally, if I'm like comparing 12, 13, and 14, something that I'm looking at when I'm looking at all these items is how are we responding to things that are currently happening in our community? And I feel like for me, item 13 is a lot more relevant. I've heard a lot more community members talking about it than item 12. Likely because people aren't looking at state auditors reports all the time. But also I'd like to focus on what's currently impacting our community. So I guess I'm asking you guys to reconsider item 13.
So I think the purpose behind 12 is to examine how our department ensures that we don't hire police officers who have extreme views, and if there's anything that we could advise the council on to advise the police department to continue that process to the best of their ability and keep it as good as it is. That I think that would be our role there. Does that sound close, Ms. Weinberg?
Yes, that one has been recharacterized as a research and recommend. And so there's the source material of the auditor's report and our own practices, and then recommendations would come from the PSAB towards the end that you described.
Wayne, does that make sense?
Yes. So I guess I'm just wondering when because it says in the PDF that we got that this is an item that would require a subcommittee. So I guess this is like a little bit of a longer question, but I'm wondering if we could learn a little bit about, like, it's separate, but also what the current committee we have focusing on bias is working on and how that could potentially intersect with number 12. Yeah, that was kind of a statement, but that is my question.
I'd like to call on Captain Canfield. It's my understanding that the existing committee is really looking at the RIPA data and the substance of what's happening in these stops, and not really not really exploring for the views of officers and the but Mike, if you're Captain Canfield, if you're able to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're substantively different topics, and the subcommittee, although it could handle that issue in theory, would essentially be a separate subcommittee. It's very different. The examination of RIPA data, how to make that accessible to the community, what our diverse community wants out of that RIPA data, and the nuances of that are very different than the extremist views that may be present in law enforcement in the examination of the Mountain View. So there's maybe with a few words they might overlap, but with the actual applications are extremely different.
Thank you.
Member Kang.
Thanks, Chair. This is in response to what Vice Chair Wang was saying earlier. She was commenting on what would be in the SRO annual report, I believe, and a point that I had brought up about the previous MOU was that it included the fact that there would need to be a report from our YSU officers, and it included possible metrics, but it didn't require any of them. So that's also something that could be explored in the next iteration of the MOU, which is why I feel it is important for us and the public to also look at a draft of the MOU before it goes into effect. So, which is why I would like to prioritize that as being rolled into item 1. That's me, thanks.
Yes, go ahead. You're gonna say what I was gonna say. Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, having had an opportunity to look at the work that Mike and his colleagues are doing, the place where the metrics, if you will, the outcomes live is in the manual, not in the MOU. So and so that will be coming to the PSAP as part of your review of the manual. And I take to heart your comments, Vice Chair Wang, about, what is that annual report, what kinds of things, and it would be looking at reporting out on the outcomes. It would be looking at, reporting out on the programming, and also any, complaints or successes that the program saw in the prior year.
Member Ayar.
Thanks, Chair. I was wondering, where are we with the MOU development? Is it on track to be signed before the start of this new school year, or will there be some sort of extension of some previous agreement? I know in one district we don't even have an agreement, so I was curious about that. And if council only adjusts our work plan in September, do we have an opportunity to ask council to look at it if the MOU is going to be done before September?
I'll answer the second question and then ask Captain Canfield to answer the first. There will not be another opportunity. There's one more council meeting before the council goes on hiatus, and that's next Tuesday, and it packeted today. And then there will be a meeting on August 30th, but that will essentially be a couple of weeks before the September meeting, when this item would otherwise be coming to the council.
And I can answer the other portion of the question. Yeah, we are anticipating that the MOU will be ready before the school year starts for both districts. However, we have reached the point where we're providing a product to lawyers to examine at this point. So they have a different kind of basis for scrutiny. So their timelines are, not our timelines. So although I'm optimistic, I can't guarantee how long it will take for them, but I anticipate that it will be ready before the school year for both. And if I can just add one, maybe a point of clarification from previous, items that are added into an MOU are much more complex to change and adjust. So for example, something like the metrics for an evaluation of a program, that MOU is an agreement that's going to exist for a defined amount of time between the two governmental bodies. The manual, we have the ability to adapt and adjust much easier. So as it stands now, that's where the evaluation of the program exists. But I think not only is that the best place, but that place will allow for the intent that the board has now, which is continuous growth of the program and continuous evaluation. By placing it in that manual, it enables us to do a better job and avoid some of that obligatory kind of red tape.
So, Captain Mike, what you're saying is that, and Ms. Ramberg, what you two are saying is basically we're not going to have a chance to look at the MOU. Is that correct? Before it's finalized.
Unless it were to be held and not enacted.
Member Kane?
I guess in light of the information regarding the timeline of the MIU, may I please change my vote from 15 to 16? Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would just like to propose that should the timeline of the MOU not happen before the school year, I would like this to go to I would like it to go to council to be considered that we see it. Obviously, if it gets approved, then there's no point. But I'm not sure if we need to do anything today to capture that, or if we would just discuss it at a future meeting, depending on timeline, and then bring it up, or how we would handle that.
I think I'm still suggesting that the board have the opportunity to determine if that is what the majority of the PSAB would like to have happen. And then it would be conditional in the way that you put it forward, Member IR, that it would be included in that September report as the interest of a majority of the board, should they have that opportunity, and then council could approve it or not approve it. But I think it's important first to determine if that's because so far the majority of the PSAB has not indicated that that is what they would like.
Yeah, I feel again that the MOU is a legal agreement between the districts and the governmental bodies, and the handbook is where we have the opportunity to make policy impact, because that is how they're going to do the work. And we already have that because that is in our work plan. So I don't know that we need to be involved in the MOU. That's just my perspective currently. Ms. Wayne?
I think I was just going to add that if it required the MOU to be held for us to see it, I would rather there be an MOU. So if we have to wait until September, then I think it's fine. That's like, I would rather there be an MOU in place rather than, us holding it to look at it. I just had a broader, like a general question to the board in terms of item 13. I guess I'm just kind of curious what's like steering you all away from it, just like out of curiosity.
Member IR?
Okay. Caught myself. Vice Chair Wang, I think it's really important, and so I'm going to make it happen in the subcommittee. That's why I'm using my votes to take on additional important things, but it's not at the expense of 13. 13 is going to happen in the subcommittee.
Member Tang.
Yeah, I share the same sentiments as member IR in regards to 13.
Anyone else? Okay, Ms. Ramberg, I think. with
Chair
that-
Frank?
Yes.
The mental health subcommittee is developing a profile of kind of needs and connections with and just characteristics of Mountain View to help inform the two new and expanded alternatives to a police-driven mental health crisis response that are coming to Mountain View and the rest of North County, and then also helping to raise awareness around the availability of those programs. I don't see how it is the same thing as really seeking to understand the substance abuse problems in our populations and then developing recommendations on how to address them. That it may be that the same group of people would want to work on that topic, but I don't think they're the same topic.
Understood. Okay, well, that is it. We have all voted. It looks
I think
like,
we have a couple other hands.
oh, there he is. Member Sandhu? I'm sorry, I didn't see earlier.
No, no worries. No worries at all. Since we took out 9, can we just add 13? That because 13 was the third one I wanted. I wanted 12, 13, and 14 personally. So is that possible?
No, well, we took out 9. We were originally only going to get to vote on 1. We took out 9, and that gave us 2.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Member Tang?
Thanks. I guess since I was looking at the mental health subcommittee as like an umbrella for solutions for mental health crises, I guess I was also thinking about it in terms of substance abuse because, hold on, I will have a better formed thought in the future. Sorry, I raised my hand before I had a very well-formed thought, but prefacing that well-formed thought was thinking of it as like an umbrella. Yeah.
I feel like what you may, and forgive me for speaking for you, but I think what you were thinking is the response to a person having a substance abuse issue is a bit of a mental health crisis. But I think the actual item is more about the source. So how are people getting into substance abuse problems and how can we prevent that? And those are slightly different, certainly both worthy. Does that sound kind of like where you were going?
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent, we're right here. So Assistant City Manager Ramberg, so there's no room for us to add a third item, correct? I just want to be clear on that.
These would be some pretty big things to add into the other things that you're doing. I'm not seeing that 13. I mean, I'm asking you to pick one, and right now you've got 2 that have majority support and 1 that has more majority support than other things. And I am now hearing that a real interest to consider, would there be a way to also do 13, but I only see there being one vote for 13. So you're saying, could everybody get a third vote? And the purpose of limiting the votes is so that you can make priorities, not so that you can vote for everything that you might wish to vote for.
Understood.
Yeah, Frank, Miss Member Ayaz had been waving at you for a while.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So I have to scroll. Member IR, thank you. I'm sorry.
I can take a hint, but then here's the thing: is I think I forgot what I was going to say. So good job, Chair Frank. Yeah, I'll come back if I remember.
You're too young to have a senior moment.
I disagree. We can all have senior moments. What was I going to say?
Member Langton, I'm putting you on the spot. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Me?
Member Langton.
Oh, LinkedIn.
No, I generally feel like if the city council has said that something's kind of a heavy lift or put it as not included, I just respect their views. And so I wouldn't vote for something that they've said not to include.
Understood. Yes, Member IR, quickly.
Quick, before I forget again. I wanted to share actually that the mountain when I had a different hat on, met with a reporter from the Mountain View Voice, and she shared she's doing a 3-part series on youth and substance abuse, and she actually wanted to come and talk to the subcommittee of PSAB, specifically Jeanette, because she's still a teenager, and she was focused on teens. And so I think, in my mind, that kind of conflated some things together. So I think it's a good thing. I think some work is going to come out of that we can inform her and she can inform us. So I think that's why I was like, the subcommittee is going to be involved in this somehow. But I take the point that, right now the work plan doesn't say we're going to provide recommendations on how to address the problem. But I think, when you start profiling and you find out things, you can't help but, or maybe this is just me, I can't help but say, well, then this should happen or this should happen, right? It starts to become clear where the gaps, in the picture are. And so I thought organically it was going to happen, and maybe that was naive of me, but anyway, those were other things that were going on in my head that were informing my choice.
Understood.
I didn't raise my hand, but
Vice Chair Wang, go ahead.
okay, awesome. I guess before we finalize our vote, I just like to, encourage the rest of the board to reconsider number 13, especially because I feel like right now there's a lot of community awareness and interest and passion around it. And I feel like if we, that's something that, because the community is thinking about it so much right now, that we could really have an impact and people would pay attention to, the things that we find and the strategies that we could potentially implement in Mountain View. In addition, I think, not to say that the other items are not important, because they're all very important. But I think just when I focus on, Mountain View as a community, that's what I find to be one of the higher priorities in comparison to kind of looking at things that are of interest nationally. So yeah, please reconsider.
Okay. Any other raised hands? So, Ms. Member, are there any other duties for this item?
No, there are not. I will go ahead. Well, what I need to do is this. Oops, that was 6. Sorry. I think I'm going to ask Commissioner Tang to keep me honest here. You have done a good job of noticing my struggles here. So does that look accurate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it looks that the item that you would put forward for your work plan is item 12. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If I might, this is not the first time you've done this, but you've got a whole year plus under your belt, and I think have become just even more dedicated over that time. And so that made this process more thoughtful in terms of what each of you put forward, and more difficult. And having served as support to another commission, this is hard. This is a hard thing to do. And the ways that you really tried to hear each other's points of view and communicate clearly why things mattered to you, and try to be creative about maybe, could we, squeeze things in and find other ways to make them work, or I really take that as an indication of the commitment that you all have to these important issues, and just to acknowledge it's hard. It's not, none of these are things that you would want to walk away from as if, and not prioritize as if they weren't important.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, I can move on to item 6. Is that correct? Very good. Are there any other comments or questions or reports that members or staff would like to add? Member Brodowski.
Are we essentially talking about non-agendized items right now? Okay, I want to talk about 3 things if I can. I get frequent requests, and so does this committee, to remove police from any call in which a potentially mentally ill person is the problem. And they say the police are not appropriate, they're not trained, they're brutal, they make the situation worse. And frankly, I think all of those statements are prejudiced, but that's one of the points I wanted to make. And what people who talk to me about this say, well, they want somebody trained, they want a psychologist, they want somebody, a psychiatric social worker to do this job rather than for a policeman to answer the 911 call. And we've already seen that this is, well, we know that the police department has, if I'm not mistaken, tell me, Mike, there are 9 open positions for psychologists that you haven't been able to fill, or have you been able to fill some since that statistic was out? And we know that the reason they haven't been able to fill some of these posts is that the kinds of people who do this job don't want to work nights and weekends. At least this is what we were told. And so I just look at myself, if I were younger, or even now, if I were called out to, even if I were trained as a psychologist, if I were called out to an emergency and didn't have a weapon, I would be afraid. And a few psychologists I've talked to about this have told me the same thing. So I think there's a whole lot impractical about this, this kind of constant push. We've got to get police out of this. I think that what I'd like to do is hear from both police and psychologists at some point. I know it can't be done now because we've got another work plan, but I wanted to put it forth now. And I want to hear about people who really deal with irrational people, because I wouldn't have a clue how to do it. And I think probably a lot of people in our police department do know. And probably a lot of psychologists do too, but it doesn't mean that they wouldn't want to have some backup. And the other problem with getting psychologists is it takes so long. You can get a police department to a call within a few minutes, and it usually takes an hour in any of the mental health programs that sound wonderful. And I'm really glad they're there. But again, I'm talking about practicality. So I wanted to put it out there. So that's the end of my lecture, of that lecture. Here comes another one. About a year ago, more than that, 2 years ago, in 2020, there was a guy who was parked on Castro Street at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he sued the police department because he said that he was dragged out of his car and he was injured, and all that the police wanted him to identify himself, and he refused to do it, and there was a fight about essentially about procedure. And so he sued the department for brutality. And I'd like to know if that has been resolved, and if it has been, can we know what the outcome was? And that's number 2. And number 3 is just something to think about. The Latino community has told me that they're really suffering from robberies, that they've had bikes stolen from upstairs balconies in their apartments, for instance, or a gardener will have one of these closed vans that it's locked, and they'll break into it, and then they'll take his equipment. So he's out of a job and he doesn't have money, and he can't replace it, and so the family's out of income. And for a lot of these people, a robbery is devastating. And then they go to the police, and the police once in a while, and I don't know what once in a while means. I don't know if that means 10% or it means 90%, but sometimes they find the guys, and we read about that in the paper. And according to what I'm hearing, and again, I don't have proof, the bad guys are brought before a judge, and the judge lets them go, and they're back on the street to do the same thing. So this is what I'm hearing, but I'm hearing mostly about the suffering, and I wanted to put that up too. And I just hope we can think about it. And if anybody in the meantime has any suggestions, because none of this is agendized, send me an email, and maybe we can get this on next year. That's the end of it.
Very well. Member Tang.
I've had comments from the public about our agenda file lacking our next meeting dates and what's our upcoming meetings, and that they would like that to be included within the agenda file in the future. And that is my comment.
Very good. Anyone else? I have a question for staff. I would like to know, given the amount of work that the subcommittees and the board itself is doing on some of the items that we consider to be heavy lifts, if it makes sense for us to plan more time between meetings so that we have time to do more work. And in addition, I know some of the members of the public were asking for members of the board to be more involved in the presentations themselves, which can be very difficult if you guys are working on a presentation right up until a couple of days before the meeting, and then we only have a day or two to actually review the content. If it makes sense for us to give ourselves more time between meetings to work and be able to provide a more a meatier presentation, if that's something that we should consider. So that's my one question. And then the second question that I have for staff is, should we consider having members of our board, and I can't remember if we've discussed this before, I think a lot of us have done this, but should we consider having members of our board do ride-alongs with the department in traffic patrol and or SRO teams? I think that would be kind of fun. And if you haven't been on a ride along with an officer, it's pretty cool. I've done it in several, a couple different departments throughout my life, and I highly recommend it if you haven't done it.
So I can respond certainly to the first question. And your second one it's certainly something we can make possible, the ride-alongs, if people are interested. So perhaps your colleagues can consider themselves encouraged by your comments. And Captain Canfield, is that correct? That's something that we can accommodate?
Absolutely.
And then on your first question, I appreciate it. I was hearing some things from the public, both last meeting and this meeting, as well as from Member Brodowski about wanting more time in advance of meetings to have packets, wanting for our tentative agenda to be not just our meeting dates, as was mentioned by Member Tang, but actual items that are going to go on different meetings planned out in advance, and then having the subcommittee members involved in making those presentations. That one of the things that, while a monthly meeting sounds like a good cadence and that there's a ton of time between 1 month and the next, it always sneaks up on me, at least, that it's not all that much time. And especially even with our current packeting 72 hours in advance as required by noticing law, that basically is like a 3-week window, because we begin creating the agenda and putting together the materials so they can go through document processing. And if we're working with the subcommittee and the subcommittee is all processing the information and contributing and having input and then being prepared to present whatever goes into the packet, I do see some advantage of having more time in between meetings, and then things coming and being a little bit maybe more meaty, rather than just kind of iterative updates with a little bit of incremental progress of what was able to happen in the 3 or so weeks since the last meeting. And I'd like to explore that and bring that back. We can't really talk about that substantively or have any action on it, but you are all asked, that each commission advisory body is asked to adopt its annual meeting dates. And so I'd like to consider that idea that you've raised and bring it forward when it's time for the commission to adopt its next meeting dates.
Thank you. Member Sandhu.
Thank you, sir. Quick question is, again, I go back to the HRC days, right? Good old days. Would there be a chance of a joint PSAP city council meeting sometimes in the future? Thank you.
I think staff can give that some thought.
And also, just so that members of the public are understanding that we are hearing your comments, I am also very interested in finding some way to create a longer view of our meeting schedule and what we might discuss over the course of the next year as we do our schedule. So I think that that's something that we can do, or at least hope we get something that we can do, so that gives us more time to consider these things in advance, and it also gives members of the public more time to prepare and gather some of their thoughts from the community to participate. Okay, anyone else? Member Sandhu, your hand is still up. Just double checking. Very good. Member IR, you're awfully quiet. You're good.
Oh, you have to call on me.
Yes, I did.
Oh, did you? Okay. I just want to thank everybody for a good discussion. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you.
Definitely. Thank you all for sharing your evening with us. You are all great parts of my life because I am very much enjoying this work, and especially members of the public who come every week. You are greatly appreciated as well. So thank you for your community service. And with that, we are adjourned.